In another episode of This Is Not a Fate channel, Fate Extra, the original. While Fate Extra originated several money-making beasts like Claudius, Tamamo-no-Mae, and other popular servants like Robin, a lot of people haven't played the original game, being overshadowed by its sequel, Fate Extra Triple C. The fact that its anime reinterpretation pretty much butchered the reputation that the game had makes things, extra difficult. While we intend to review Fate Extra Last Anchor in the near future, we feel like some context is needed to talk about the anime, and that context is the original PSP game, Fate Extra, which is often overlooked by fans of the franchise and PSP gamers. However, the upcoming remake of the game might change that, but we'll have to see. For now, let's explore the original game and see if the game is worth playing 11 years after its release, or if this extravagant Fate product is better left lost in the cyberspace, Mooncell, whatever. Alright, no more extra puns from this point onward.
Fate Extra was a PSP game released in 2011, developed by Image Epoch, who also worked on the Luminous Arc franchise, and my favorite 3DS RPG, Still Aglow. The game was published by Marvelous, who continued to publish the extra games from the franchise, and localized by Axis Games. The game is an RPG with lots of visual novel elements similar to games like Persona or Trails of Cold Steel, with dungeon crawling and social interactions being the main features. There's a lot of text, of course. After all, it's pretty much a visual novel while you kill people every now and then. While the game has above average reviews, being released on just one console, the game isn't as widespread compared to other Fate products like the anime or visual novel. Even then, the game was a success, spawning sequels, spin-offs, and all-time favorite servants for the gacha game Fate Grand Order. The game takes place in an alternate timeline, in which there's no magic left in the world, and humanity is on the brink of destruction due to war and conflict. For that reason, Spiritron hackers went to the Mooncell core, a database located in the moon, where the Holy Grail War is being hosted for a chance of granting a wish which might change the course of humanity. Here we play as Hakuno Kishinami, or your name here, a character with amnesia and an unknown backstory, who finds himself trapped in this Holy War by chance. Your objective is very simple and understandable: survive, until you figure out who you really are and what to do next, with the aid of one of 3 selectable servants.
Here we can choose from a famous returning character and 2 new additions. Saber, or Red Saber, not to be confused with Saber of Red, is pretty much a copy-paste of the original Saber, with red instead of blue. She is the Saber face of the game, like any other Saber face, right, you get the idea. Then we have Archer, not to be confused with the Fate Stay Night Archer, because they have different backstories. And finally we have Caster, who's a fox waifu, even the game tells you that. Every character has its level of difficulty, being Saber the easy mode, Archer medium difficulty, and Caster hard, plus the difficulty selection at the beginning of the game. This is very reminiscent of the Resident Evil 1 difficulty selection, where you have to choose from beginner to arrange, and then select either Jill or Chris, with the routes and difficulty being different from each other. We will expand more on each character in the story section, but for now, let's go with our impressions with our playthroughs, with my pal Mokinaga playing with Saber, and me, Moki the Kid, playing with Caster.
One word: Persona. Obvious comparisons aside, the game was pretty enjoyable overall. Despite playing as Caster, objectively the worst option for a newcomer, the game was a pretty decent experience. While the gameplay isn't stellar by any means, I got used to it, more on this later, and kept playing mainly for the narrative. Similar to the original Fate novel, the main driving force to keep playing is watching the story unfold by the virtue of its characters and story. Fate Extra is no exception to this, with a very compelling narrative and characters, managing to be its own thing while bringing back some familiar faces, such as Kirei, Ren, and Shinji. It really feels like you're part of a Holy Grail war, which is a good thing. And probably it's the only Fate product that immerses the player as an active participant in the war. While the original novel does this by the nature of visual novels, I find it appealing to have an actual Fate video game in which you are a participant of the war, striving to survive while fighting friends and foes. It's a niche product for sure. Fate fans and Persona fans might get something from the game just by its own nature.
There will be heavy spoilers in this section. Like most RPGs, we recommend going in as blind as possible, so skip to this time if you want to skip them. Alright, as explained before, the story follows us as Hakuno Kishinami, an amnesiac who lacks a wish for the Holy Grail, going through various phases of the Holy Grail War in the Moon Cell. Masters are paired each round to fight each other. The winner moves to the next round and the loser gets erased from existence. This sets the stakes really high and leaves the protagonist two options: to win and crush the dreams of his opponents, or to carry on to the next fight, a survivor without a goal. This is one of the concepts that gets explored during the course of the story: the weight of our dreams and what remains of them. As we move forward in the story, our character looks back on the people he's defeated. Each one of them left an imprint on his story, and this idea gets carried on until the last fight of the game. It's during the very last arc that the underlying theme of the story gets explained more clearly: war. No shit. We learn of the man behind the Great War, Twice Peaceman, who, much like our character, is a Mooncell NPC who gained sentience and has been acting as a master in the war. The person he was based on hated war, but seeing the progress it brought to the world, he couldn't help but see it as a solution. Cycle after cycle, he used the Great War in hopes of having the winner fulfill his wish, to continue plunging the world into war. Because in his eyes, if all that remains was stagnation, then it was humanity's fate to rot away and disappear. Although extreme, it's a vision that many people could agree on, making him a bit relatable. Although we don't get much time to get attached to him.
The game also takes the time to humanize all other opponents we face, with their servants serving as foils to their character, to contrast with them and exalt their values. Shinji is a coward that likes to boast, traits that make him hateable, even as we learn that he's actually a child using a digital avatar to make himself look older. His servant, Francis Drake, is just as boastful, but having the strength to back it up. Leaves Sarah as an older sister type of character, like she was babysitting him. The underhanded Robin Hood is a great match for the chivalrous Dan Blackmore, as their mutual respect shines through their bickering, like an old man and the rebellious grandson. Alice and Alice show both how innocent and utterly terrifying children can be, as their whimsical exterior covers a dark past, much like the nursery rhymes of old. Of course, this along with the moral dilemma of murdering a literal child. I could go on analyzing every master-servant interaction, but I don't want to make this section too long. Believe me, each is well crafted and packs an emotional punch. Well, almost all of them. That's the end of spoilers for this section. Overall, the narrative and the characters in particular are very well made, with an appropriate use of the virtual world setting and an underlying theme that's still relevant to this day.
The gameplay, just like Persona, is mainly divided into two gameplay mechanics: social interaction in your hub and dungeon exploration. The more social-oriented gameplay happens at the school. Here you can explore most of the facility while talking to NPCs, buying stuff, and assigning your stat points. You can also take quests here and progress in the game's story. There's nothing much else to say about it. You can also get fast travel early in the game, so you won't get lost like in the original Persona 3, thank god. There are, of course, certain dialogue options that you will take during the game. Some of these can even end up in a game over, so remember to save your game. If Fate Extra kept something from the original novel, it's the number of death flags that you can encounter, so pay attention to dialogue and your surroundings. There is one very important decision that leads to a story branch, but it doesn't change the rest of the route that much if we're being honest, let alone the final outcome of the game. It's pretty much choose your waifu, but considering the eroge nature of the original novel, it's no surprise really. At the very least it changes 2 rounds of the war, so that's something.
As for exploration, well, you explore the dungeons with your servant, fighting and avoiding enemy mobs. If you touch one of them on the overworld, you get into the combat phase. Sometimes you interact with other characters or do certain quests in dungeons, but there isn't much more than that. Enemies respawn if you want to farm a bit, and if you get out of the dungeon, the day ends, so you get pretty limited entries. You have to make the most of your exploration days. The combat is just glorified rock paper scissors, with some skills. Your 3 options are attack, break, and guard. They beat each other in that order. Not like you're gonna forget it, since the triangle is on screen at all times during fights. If you, or your opponent, connect 3 normal commands in a row, you get an extra attack. Skills consume MP and grant additional effects or deal more damage than your normal attacks. You can also use items or code casts to provide some minor damage or utility in the form of heals, buffs, and debuffs. Finally, we got the noble phantasms, which vary from servant to servant. Overall, the combat is serviceable, if a little boring. While gameplay can be pretty intense during the first stages of the game, later on it becomes repetitive and terribly unbalanced. If you get hit by 3 commands in a row, it's back to your last save. This includes normal mobs. This is more egregious when we consider that some runs may require some level of grind to progress the story. This can be very frustrating, especially if you chose Caster as your servant, since she has the weakest early game of the 3, along with the fact that MP recharge for your servant is unavailable until mid-game. On the other hand, certain bosses are a literal joke once you figure the game's mechanics, aka skill spam. Some can go down in 1 or 2 rounds with a combination of one-shots and stun locks.
The game also has a pretty unique leveling up system, as the stats you will get from leveling up have to be assigned outside of the main dungeon. The catch being that leaving said dungeon ends your current day, so you can make the grind any easier without spending some of your limited in-game time. In theory, this makes for a very intricate and challenging leveling up system, where you have to give priority to certain stats over others when leveling up your character. In practice, and just like meme Dark Souls builds, investing everything into strength or magic will net you the best results. The fact that some characters have different stat growth means that some points are kinda wasted. Having a good stat growth in magic, when your character is a physical damage dealer, does nothing but screw up your stat spread. Stat descriptions don't help to alleviate this issue either. For example, what the fuck is defense when in jeopardy, or stabilizes damage stats? Raises skill speed? In a turn-based RPG? Well, if you don't know what these stats do, don't worry bro, nobody does. Overall, the combat mechanics are probably the weakest aspect of the game, lacking in both depth and balance. With that being said, you can get used to it, so it doesn't really ruin the experience. I ended up laughing at how unbalanced the battles got sometimes. And even though it was frustrating, I still enjoy it. Kind of. I've seen worse.
The graphics of the game are alright, if a bit bland. The models look okay, mostly for the characters. Enemies fit with the style, looking like robots or cyber cards from Yu-Gi-Oh!, but they struck me as unfinished. Backgrounds are okay, it fits with the world of the game being a virtual world where we have hackers instead of mages, but there isn't much to it. I only remember a few details from the backgrounds, like in one stage there was a whale. No, that's it. However, character design shines through the visual issues. Character design was supervised by the original artist of the novel, Takeuchi Takahashi, but the art was done by Wadarako. Later, she would become a staple artist in the Fate franchise, and even outside of the franchise, being the character designer and artist of Oyokhroni from Hololive. Weapon design was also made by an important artist, Huke, who also worked on Steins Gate and on Tekken Ashikiara. It certainly shows. Characters and weapons have appealing designs with lots of detail that represent their characters. For example, Nero, looking like a carbon copy of Artoria at first glance, has a particular design showing lots of skin representing her demands for attention and praise, while being elegant at the same time. Tamamo has a cute design, looking like a cute Miko combining her seductive nature while keeping the wife material part of her design intact. Robin has this laid-back feeling, looking like an unreliable guy who has lots to hide and will take advantage of you at a moment's notice. But his relaxed nature might incite you to approach the guy for some good laughs regardless. Visuals, at least when it comes to characters, is one of Extra's main features. And while the art might look a bit basic compared to current Wadarko standards, I still believe that it holds up nicely, and certainly good during its release.
As for the voices, they are great. I honestly prefer some of the deliveries here compared to Grand Dollar counterparts, such as Nero being less noisy in Extra, but again that comes to taste. However, the delivery is good and fits nicely on most characters. Chiwa Saito's caster does a good job, giving this feeling of a cute foxy waifu, with good delivery on funny scenes, while hitting hard on emotional ones. Saber is, like I mentioned before, less noisy. She isn't an Umu machine gun like Nero is nowadays. Sakura Tange does a great job portraying this debaucherous character, showing that there's more than Umu in a character that has a very tragic background, with humble and honest feelings that Nero comes to finally understand after her mortal life ended in tragedy. She also trash talks a lot, so be ready to get some good laughs as well. She's a very compelling character for sure. There are lots of other good voice actors here, especially in Servants.
It's worth noting that the game was released during the end of the PSP's lifetime, with the beta being released the next year. This, combined with the mixed reception from critics, an aspect that was far more important at the time, meant that the game didn't become as popular as it could have been, considering it's a Fate product. However, on the 10th anniversary of the original game, Type Moon announced a remake for Fate Extra, titled Fate Extra Record. There is no release date yet, although some gameplay has been shown. With what we can see, the combat system, one of the weakest aspects of the game as previously mentioned, is receiving a complete overhaul, ditching the rock-paper-scissors format completely. There are some updated character designs alongside a gigantic visual upgrade. Expectations are certainly high after what's been shown, so keep your eyes peeled for any new information. 11 years after its release, the game hasn't aged all that well. However, that doesn't mean that Fate Extra is a bad game by any means. Its narrative, characters, and ambience is certainly compelling and interesting, but gameplay is stiff, which is one of the main points of playing a game. Being a story-driven game, the dialogue and characters are still its main feature, and they certainly met our expectations. I feel like playing the game just to comprehend Emiya, Tamamo and Nero's backstory makes the game totally worth it, so we encourage Fate fans to give the game a fair chance. If you watch the anime first, the story is totally different, being the anime a different take on the original product, and doesn't represent the message and feel of the original game. Overall, Fate Extra is a decent game, with flaws mainly in its gameplay, with the narrative and characters making up for it. After all, this was the first Fate RPG, so for a first shot it's pretty competent. Now, with a clear understanding of the Extra universe of Fate, you can go on and play its sequel, Extra CCC, which is an improvement in every aspect of the game. Assuming you can read Japanese, because the game was never localized here, so maybe studios, please bring CCC for the true cast-off experience. Hey, while writing and editing this video, a translation was finally finished. There's no official release yet, but we will certainly cover the game once we get our hands on it. It was a long wait, but they did it. Fans 1, Type Moon 0.